Okay, so we talked a little bit about party realignment in the last lecture, but I want to take some more time to discuss this event that has occurred because it makes up such a huge pivotal part of Texas politics. And so we're going to look at party realignment. We're still dealing with linkage institutions, but just as a refresher, realignment can be defined as a shift, a lasting shift of party loyalty and attachment. And remember that it has to be a very lasting shift of party loyalty and attachment. It can't just be for one or two election cycles. It has to be for an extended period of time. And so in Texas, uh, by and large, from Reconstruction to the 1990s, Texas was dominated by Democrats, but the Democratic Party during this time was a very conservative party, or by and large was conservative. There were different factions within the Democratic Party, but conservative Democrats are going to be the ones that control Texas and most of the Deep South. And so there's only going to be some very small instances of Republican successes during this time between Reconstruction in the 1870s all the way to the 1990s. But one of those significant areas of Republican success is going to be at the behest of Allen Shivers, who was the governor of Texas. And Allen Shivers is going to be a charismatic and conservative governor of Texas, a Democratic governor of Texas. And during the 1952 and 1956 national elections, Republican Dwight Eisenhower is going to be running for office against Adlai Stevenson in both situations. And so the National Democratic Party didn't really align with the conservative Democratic Party in Texas. And because of some differences of opinion, what will happen is Allen Shivers will create a conservative faction within the Democratic Party in Texas and dub them the Shivercrats. And so what happens is it's going to allow for Dwight Eisenhower to win Texas over the Democratic challenger, Adlai Stevenson. So in both 1952 and 1956, even though the state is going to be dominated by Democratic leaders, because of the differences of opinion in regards to the National Party and the State Party, Allen Shivers really aligns more with the Republican candidate. And so he will rally Texas Democrats to, or a portion of Texas Democrats, enough Texas Democrats to deliver Texas electoral votes to Eisenhower in 1952 and in 1956. So it's going to break the tradition in 1952 of what is known as straight ticket voting, in which voters select candidates from the same party for all offices on the ballot. This didn't occur. Instead of straight ticket voting, at the top of the ticket with the Republican nominee running for president, Democrats are going to vote for a Republican. And then in down ballot races, as you get into state races, they'll vote Democratic. So they're going to be voting for both political parties. By and large, Texas has a very extreme history of straight party voting, just going in, pushing straight party because they'd rather have one political party represent every elected office. They don't really pay that much attention to who the person is. But Shivers is going to lead this faction to stop this straight ticket voting for 1952 and 1956, and is going to allow for Texas to swing into the Republican category, helping to ensure that Eisenhower will be the president. Then we have the election of John Tower. And in 1960, Lyndon Johnson, he is the Democratic senior senator from Texas, and he runs for re-election to the U.S. Senate, and he wins. But at the same time, he was also on John F. Kennedy's he was running as John F. Kennedy's vice presidential running mate. And So Johnson's presence on the Democratic ticket temporarily stayed Texas' movement towards the Republican Party. So even though in 1952 and 1956 Texas had swung Republican, because Johnson is a very powerful politician from Texas and he's on the Democratic ticket, Texas swings back into the Democratic Party. And so in 1961, we're going to see the inauguration of Kennedy and Johnson, and a special election will be held to fill Johnson's Senate seat. And an individual by the name of John Tower will win this election. He becomes not only the first Republican U.S. Senator from Texas since Reconstruction, but also the first Republican statewide office holder in Texas since Reconstruction. And so we're going to see some limited success here in regards to the Republican Party as with the election of John Tower. And John Tower will go on to win re-election in 1966, 1972, and 1978. But it would be 17 years after Tower's first victory before a different Republican won a statewide office. So he is really going to be the exception to the rule here in Texas as a senator, a Republican senator from our state. And what all this really harkens back to, folks, remember, is ideology. Texas isn't deciding on individuals based on their political party necessarily. It's based upon their conservatism or their liberalism. And there was a faction of liberals within the Democratic Party that really sort of split up that vote. And so it's going to allow for the Republican Party to have limited successes in these areas. And so then another area of limited success is going to be the election of Bill Clements as governor of Texas. He is going to be elected in 1978, and it marks the real beginning of two-party politics in Texas, which won't last long, but we do have this two-party political time period where Democrats and Republicans are being elected. Governor Clements is going to use his power to make appointments to boards and commissions and judgeships, and he's going to use his power to recruit people who would publicly declare their Republicanism. And so some referred to these new converts as, quote, closet Republicans who had finally gone public. And so what this does is it helps to build the Republican Party in Texas, and it promotes this realignment because the governor is making it okay for you to be a Republican in Texas. It hadn't been okay since Reconstruction. And so it's okay to be a Republican in Texas again. And he's appointing people to the bureaucracy. He's appointing people to different agencies and boards and benches and things like that. And so he's sort of widening the power of Republicans in the state. Now, Clements will lose in 1982 to Democrat Mark White. But that year, Democrats elected a statewide. So in 1982, excuse me, I got a little off track. Clements is going to lose to Democrat Mark White. So this would be a blow to the Republicans because they had success with Clements and Clements being able to appoint people. But their party also had very little success in winning other statewide elected offices. And in fact, that year, the Democrats elected a statewide office, including Ann Richards as state treasurer, Jim Hightower as agricultural commissioner, Gary Morrow as land commissioner, and Jim Maddox as attorney general. And so you sort of see a swing back into the Democratic column after 1982. But then 1986 rolls around, and Clements is going to be reelected to the governor's office. He'll actually go on to defeat Mark White, and he's going to use this return as a way to it also help build the Republican Party a little bit more. And so it's going to be Clements that's sort of going to be a very pivotal individual in helping this realignment, this movement for realignment. And then there's Senator Phil Gramm. John Tower is going to retire from office after 4 terms in the Senate. And Phil Gramm is a Democratic representative from Texas' 6th Congressional District. And he will use Tower's retirement to advance from the U.S. House to the U.S. Senate. So Gramm had first been elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1978 as a Democrat. By the early 80s, by about 1981, he had gained some national prominence for his work on the federal budget under Republican President Ronald Reagan. And Graham, who served as a member of the House Budget Committee, was accused of leaking Democratic strategy to the White House Budget Office. So he's sort of playing both sides. David Stockman, who is the budget director under Ronald Reagan, will confirm that Graham had in fact been the individual to leak Democratic strategy to the White House Budget Office. And so because of Graham's disloyalty to the party and because of House rules, Graham will not be reappointed to another term on the House Budget Committee. And so what Graham does is he uses the loss of his committee seat as an excuse to convert to the Republican Party. I said that in the last lecture, many very important politicians in Texas actually began as Democrats, but will then realign themselves as Republicans, and Phil Graham is going to be one of them. In 1983, Graham will resign his seat in the U.S. House. And outgoing Republican Governor Bill Clements is going to call a special election, which would be held 1 month after Graham's resignation to fill his seat. And so because no other candidate could really put together a successful campaign in such a short time period, Graham will easily win re-election to the same seat he had just vacated. But this time, instead of as a Democrat, he will do so as a Republican. And so in 1984, he, quote, is fully baptized as a Republican, and he actually runs and wins election as the U.S. Senator, thereby filling the seat previously held by John Towers. So what this does is John Towers leaving as a Republican, it doesn't swing that seat back to the Democratic Party. It is maintained by the Republican Party because Phil Graham has converted from a Democrat to a Republican, and it allows for the Republican Party to retain one of Texas's 2 seats in the House, in the U.S. Senate. So you have a Democrat and a Republican as senators representing Texas, which hadn't been done for most of Texas history, and it's not done in modern time either. So Graham will easily win re-election in 1990 and 1996, but he chooses not to run for re-election in 2002. But at that point, a female individual named Kay Bailey Hutchison will become the U.S. Senator. So that seat, since John Tower in the 1970s, following Lyndon Johnson, will be held by a Republican all the way up until modern time. So we do have this move toward Republican control. In 1988, the Republican Party in Texas made significant gains. Bill Clements' return to the governor's mansion, as well as George H.W. Bush's election to the presidency, is going to really assist in helping this. The party is going to win 4 statewide offices. 3 Republicans won election to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Kent Hance was elected to the Texas Railroad Commission. In 1990, Republicans are going to capture a few more offices. They are going to capture the state treasurer and agricultural commissioner seats and another seat on the state Supreme Court. The big setback was in 1990 was the loss of the governor's office. Bill Clement didn't seek re-election, and an individual named Clayton Williams, who was a political newcomer, he hadn't held political office before, but he is an extremely, extremely wealthy individual, a Texas oilman out here from Midland. He uses his considerable wealth to win the Republican nomination, but his campaign is essentially a disaster. And he is running against a Democratic woman named Ann Richards. And he will make some terrible remarks in regards to women and rape and make light of certain things. And it will cause him to lose the election to Democrat Ann Richards in 1990. But it will allow for the rise of an individual named George W. Bush in 1994, who will then go on to defeat Ann Richards for the governorship, and then will go on to be reelected in 1998, and then, as we know, become the president in 2000. So we're going to see some significant changes, and it's going to be this time in 1994 that Texas went from its brief two-party system to a one-party Republican system. So we had this period of um, transference, essentially. We had one party control up until the 1970s, and between the 1970s and 1994, we had some mixed control of Democrats and Republicans. And then in 1994 is going to be when Texas really becomes the Republican controlled state that it is today, and it continues to be today. And so um, we're going to see we're going to see some significant changes. And let me just make one quick note. I think that I said Phil Graham's seat was going to be when he did not seek re-election in 2002. I think I said that Kay Bailey Hutchison was going to take over for him, and I believe that to be incorrect. I think that Phil Graham's seat is actually going to be taken over by John Cornyn. So I just wanted to make that quick note. Kay Bailey Hutchison will be elected in 1994 after Democrat Lloyd Bentsen resigns to become Secretary of the Treasury under President Clinton. So this allows his resignation will allow the Texas Republicans to capture both of the senatorial seats in Texas. And so Kay Bailey Hutchison and Phil Graham will serve a period of time together in the Senate. So we have this Republican-dominated state from 1994 to the present. In 1994, the Republicans are going to capture all 3 seats on the Railroad Commission, as well as a majority of the seats on the state Supreme Court. They're going to retain control of the Agricultural Commission's office. They're going to gain 3 additional seats on the State Board of Education for a total of 8. In addition, George W. Bush will be elected governor. When all the dust clears, Republicans will control 23 of the total 27 statewide offices. And then after the 1998 elections, the Republicans will hold all statewide offices. And then after the 2000 elections, Republicans will hold all statewide elections and will have a majority in both the Texas House and in the Texas Senate. And so this is going to really substantially change Texas party politics. So we're going to see Texas become this Republican-dominated state. Now, because there is, Texas is a dominated state by the Republicans, the Democrats do still play some kind of a role. And one of the characteristics of dominance, one political party dominating state politics, is that there's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of different factions that occur within that particular political party. So as in the Democrats, you had the liberals and you had the conservatives. Well, now you have Democrats being much more liberal, and so they're much more united, and the Republicans are going to have more factional infighting. So the Democrats are less factionally splintered, and the Republicans are going to be having a little bit of trouble with that. In modern time, in much more recent history, Texas Democratic operatives have launched an initiative called Turn Texas Blue. And this Democratic movement is sometimes known as Battleground Texas, but it refers to efforts to return Texas to Democratic dominance. And so there is this push for Democratic dominance to become a thing again in Texas. And so there are going to be some rising stars within the political party, and I would suggest that perhaps Wendy Davis's star sort of fizzled a little bit. She did run for governor in 2014, and she was defeated by Greg Abbott, but she was a rising star within the Texas political party because of a filibuster that she utilized to defeat a controversial women's reproductive rights bill in the Texas Senate back in 2013, I believe. So she capitalized on this success to run for governor, but she is not going to win that. But she has made some talks about going on to run for the United States House of Representatives, maybe in the next election cycle. But then you have Joaquin and Julian Castro. They are two talented young Hispanic politicians, twin brothers. Um, they have held some political offices. Uh, let's see, former San Antonio mayor and Obama administration Secretary of Housing and Urban Development has been Julian Castro, and his twin brother is the U.S. congressman representing Texas's 20th district. And they're likely to be key players in the future of the Democratic Party in Texas and in Washington. And I believe maybe it's, I'm going to be real honest, and I apologize for this. I can't remember which one is currently running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency. There's just so many in the field. I think there's 18 at this point. So it's hard for me to keep them all straight. But they are some rising stars within the party as well. But there are some things that suggest that perhaps Texas might go back in a Democratic way. And one of those things is the demographics. We have a significantly rising population of Hispanic voters within Texas, and so it increases the size of the Hispanic population and potentially the voters, and they typically will, or they have historically supported the Democratic Party, and so this, could be something that assists in swinging the party dominance back to the Democratic side. It's something that people are watching significantly, but there are some things that we must look at and take into consideration. There are some caveats. Historically, they have supported the Democratic Party. However, Hispanics are by and large Catholic. And so the Democratic Party has some very liberal social ideals, and they might not align with some of these conservative Hispanic ideals, things like abortion rights and things of that nature. Some are ineligible to vote because they are not U.S. citizens yet, and so that's going to limit the amount of people that can actually take part in some of these elections. And then the Republicans aren't just going to sit idly by and allow a huge demographic of people to be forfeited to their this opposite political party. So the Republicans they haven't been great at it, but they are working on Republican outreach to this block of voters. And so there is some suggestion, some hints that we might see the Democrats take over some statewide houses or statewide offices at some point. Beto O'Rourke in the 2018 elections, he is going to come very close to unseating a sitting Republican senator, and so it remains to be seen what the future holds for Texas in regards to politics, but it is something that we will obviously closely monitor. So we're going to stop here, and I'll see you in the next lecture.